Spit out your pills and the amber shot. Please believe someone needs you here. Hey, it's Jade Van Clay, and this is Backstage Triage. And that was a haiku by today's guest, Danny Bland. This is a brand new podcast taking place at the intersection of health and entertainment, brought to you with interviews between me, a registered nurse, and different folks who have made careers out of bringing us the art, music, film, television, and literature that we love. We're talking about their experiences navigating physical and mental health as artists and predominantly gig workers. Before we get on with it, I want to mention that you can find me on Patreon at Backstage Triage to have access to bonus episodes each week, or as much as I can. You can also find me on the Podbean Patron program. So, on today's episode, we are talking with Danny Bland, who is a novelist and haikuist. He is also a tour manager and has worked with some incredible folks. You can usually find him on tour with Dave Alvin, the MC5, and most recently, Steve Earle. Danny has been in the music industry longer than I've been alive, and I know he won't be mad at me for saying that. He got his start in the midst of the Seattle grunge movement as a member of Catbutt, who was one of the earliest bands signed to Sub Pop. If you're not familiar with Sub Pop, you might recognize a few of their other artists from over the years, including Fleet Foxes, Beach House, The Postal Service, Slater, Kinney, Foles, Blitzen Trapper, Father John Misty, The Shins, Mudhoney, and a couple other bands that maybe you've heard of, like Soundgarden and Nirvana. Yeah. Danny managed to get sober in 1992 and continued to thrive in the music industry in spite of being one of the only sober people that he knew at that time. This man is a master storyteller, and he is going to share some stories with us today that may very well bring you to laughter, to tears, and back again before you know what's hit you. I do want to issue a content warning here that we will be talking about Danny's experience with addiction and recovery, including discussion about drug and alcohol use. If that is triggering to you, I would graciously encourage you to join us in the next episode or go check out last week's show if you haven't caught it yet. All right, enough tire kicking. Let's get on with the show.
I love wearing them out early on, especially when I was just wearing the bandana wrapped around my face. I mean,
you look like an old school train robber. It's awesome.
No better look.
Yeah.
You look like you're a member of the Clash. It's awesome.
Yeah, honestly, the contact photo that I have for you in my phone is of you wearing a bandana and like your hat and your braids, and you look like nobody has ever looked cooler.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, it's a good look. It's a good look for me, and I'm gonna continue to wear it as long as I can.
I definitely will be too. And are you fully vaccinated at this point?
Yeah, I got the Johnson & Johnson about 3 or maybe 4 weeks ago now.
Did you have any side effects?
Well, I was sicker than shit for like 24 hours, which I knew was coming, and I was prepared for it, snack-wise and TV-wise, so I was ready.
Yeah. Okay, so I would absolutely love for you to tell our listeners about the outlaw country cruise that you found yourself on at the beginning of 2020. Please.
Well, the entire last tour that I did was insane. I flew to Chicago at the end of January with Dave Alvin, and we were playing the last night of this club Fitzgerald's. The next day, those guys all flew home, and I flew to Nashville, picked up Steve Earle's gear, drove it to Miami, where Steve would fly in from New York, and the rest of the band was flying in from all over. As I'm driving to Miami, I'm listening to the NPR station, and it caught my ear because the first deaths from the coronavirus had just happened, and it happened in a suburb of Seattle. So that caught my ear, and I was also like apprehensive being on a cruise, and it's not because I hate people. It's that I despise fun in the sun.
Right.
I just hate it.
I can relate.
And it appeared to me that this cruise was just going to be like being at a festival that you can't leave.
Right.
So I am driving, and I'm listening to them talk about this new deadly virus that's ravaging a suburb of the city that I just flew from.
Right.
And then, I mean, this is a whole year ago now, so nobody remembers, but the Outlaw Country Cruise was going to Jamaica. So in between news of the new deadly virus, an earthquake happened in Jamaica.
Oh my gosh. So that's two public health crises happening at the same time.
Exactly. So we get there, and I'd never worked a cruise before, so I'm sort of supervising as they load the gear from the truck onto the boat, the ship, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And I'm watching, and I'm thinking about the virus, and I'm also thinking about Legionnaire's disease, because I think that's on a cruise ship, right?
Norovirus. Yep. Pretty much any foodborne illness you can think of.
And I'm watching, there's a whole huge long line of the fans getting in. So it's 2,500 people are on this boat.
Wow.
And it sells out right away. In fact, Steve Earle is booked February 2022, which is sold out already.
Oh, wow.
It's nuts.
Is he headlining? Like, does he headline this cruise?
They have a bunch of headliners. Like the year that we're talking about now, it was the Mavericks and Chris Christopherson and Lucinda Williams, Steve Earle, and then a shit ton of bands going down the rock royalty chain.
Right.
So there's the line of people to get in, and then there's the line where the bands load in, and I'm just watching this, and it all of a sudden occurs to me that I'm getting ready to board a 70s disaster movie. If the earthquake in Jamaica has caused a tsunami, who knows?
Power plant disaster.
Exactly. And then there's this virus that's going around, and watching Mojo Nixon, be the Ernest Borgnine of this movie.
Right.
Lucinda Williams would be the Shelley Winters of this movie. And then Chris Christopherson, who would be the Chris Christopherson of this movie. We loaded on there, and one of the big slots is the band that plays as the ship pulls out of port. And that happened to be Steve Earle. So we got on this boat and went right to work, setting it up. And for some reason, I kept hearing orchestral swells as I was sure the danger was building. And we pulled out. And, not only do we have to deal with earthquakes and tsunamis and disease, but then there's giant sea creatures. It's a possibility.
Yeah. This is very cinematic, the setup to this event.
The first day was kind of normal. There's cafes open all the time, and there's buffets where you go get your food 24 hours a day. And
I'm picturing like buckets filled with ranch dressing and swimming pools filled with PBR. That's what I'm picturing here.
PBR, is that some, I thought HPB is, I think.
Yeah, right.
That's what it is. I mean, the Outlaw Country Cruise is really a hillbilly wife swap cruise, I think.
I mean, it sounds awesome. This sounds like right up my alley.
I had a lot of fun in spite of myself. The good news for me is that there's 6 floors of ship before you get to daylight. So I didn't really see the sun that much. I came out in the evening. I came out, during that one particular show that we're doing that was by the side of the pool. But on the second day, all of a sudden, I went to the buffet, and all of a sudden there was a server there. You weren't allowed to get your own food anymore. This is way before we heard about anything about having masks.
So the pandemic basically descended upon other countries, surely in January, February at this point. And so you're on the cruise as regulations are starting to be enforced.
Well, I think it was a little before that, but also it was cruise ships. So they must have already known about that cruise ship that was, in Japan that they weren't letting people off of. And I bet, word came down like, we better get ready for something terrible to happen.
Right.
For all the shit that I'm talking about, I did manage to have a good time. It was fun. But then again, I enjoy being in the elevator with a redneck couple who are fighting. That's entertainment to me.
So a lot of them were probably under the influence, and you yourself have been sober for how long?
29 years now. When I first got sober, I didn't like being around drunk people because I was embarrassed, because that's what I used to do all the time. I thought it was because I didn't want to be tempted. But that wasn't true, because when you're sober and you see drunk people, it doesn't look the least bit appealing.
No, it doesn't.
Not really. Mm-mm. Now it's full on entertaining. And in the ships, they have relatively narrow hallways. So if I'm going to my room at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, there's always someone who's using each side of the hallway to get
like a pinball machine, like bouncing back and forth.
As long as they don't fall on the ground, it's entertaining.
Yes.
I would say. So the first stop is, what are those little islands at the bottom of Florida?
Florida Keys.
Keys. And everyone gets off the boat for the afternoon. I do not. There's nothing in the Florida Keys for me.
Me neither. Wait, isn't Hemingway's house down there?
It is.
That's the only thing I think I would want to get off the boat for, maybe.
Yeah. There's another Hemingway house in Illinois that I've been to before, but still, the sunshine and the tourist stuff and all that. Well, I would reach the point of diminishing returns long before I got to the Hemingway house, so I skipped it. Another thing about being on a cruise ship is that you take for granted in your life now is being able to text the bass player and say, "Hey, we're going on 15 minutes earlier now." There is no service out there.
Oh, no.
Yeah, there's no texting anybody. There's no calling anybody.
Do you just like walk around with a bullhorn then? Just like...
And there's no way to walk around and do that because there's, like I said, there's 6 floors
Oh my gosh.
before you even get to the surface of the thing. It's a floating city.
Right.
And luckily, my guys are professionals. They were there on time. And still, not having a way to communicate with people and being a tour manager is a nightmare.
Yes, I am sure.
So that we take off. There's a 24 hours just at sea. So you're doing shows. The Super Suckers were there, so I had old friends there. I saw them play, and Sarah Borges. And the next stop was Jamaica. And I got off in Jamaica just because I had never been in that country before. I figured I'd do some touristy shopping, find trinkets for my daughter or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then basically we were just turning around and coming back.
Oh, so one thing I wanted to also touch on about the Outlaw Country Cruise that you talked about on the Dana Gould Hour. So you said there were recovery meetings on the cruise.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, yeah, every morning I went to the 9 o'clock one. I think pretty much every day I was there because, first of all, there's not a lot to do at 9 o'clock in the morning on a cruise ship.
Where everyone's hungover still?
Hungover or you'll get your bad coffee. So, yeah, I think there was a 9 o'clock and a noon or something. There must have been, I don't know, 25, 30 people there every day. Mostly musicians, people who were playing there, and it was great.
That's awesome.
I mean, that is the great bonding experience of recovery. It's like Fight Club. Like we see each other out in public. Mm-hmm. So we know what we are.
And was it specific to, like, it was an AA, NA, or just in general for folks that are in recovery?
I think they were AA meetings. It matters not to me. When you're on tour, sometimes you don't really have a choice. So you go to the one that's available. And I've never been that picky about the difference between the two.
Right.
Strip away everything, the politics, and it's all the same thing.
Right. So. Yeah. When I worked at the psych hospital, I always enjoyed getting to go work on the chemical dependency unit because they would have regular AA and NA meetings. And I really enjoyed being able to listen because even if it's not alcohol or drugs, I feel like everybody struggles with something in their life with which they have an unhealthy relationship. And I always found the things that they talked about just really applicable, even if it's not specifically those things that you struggle with.
Well, I mean, in a person's clean and sober experience, and like, okay, so mine's 29 years worth at this point. There was only less than a year where I actually struggled with wanting to do drugs or wanting to drink. And then after that, once the obsession to use was lifted from me, then it's a matter of learning how to live.
Right.
I've had 28 years worth of trying to learn how to live. Drugs and alcohol bring us to these meetings so we can figure out what our real problems are.
Like somebody
Right.
drinks too much, snorts cocaine, that's the house on the ponies. And those addictions are considered disorders.
Taking a quick break here to bring you a message from our sponsors. Kidding. I don't have sponsors. That was a joke, but I do have a business of my own, so hey, free advertising. I am the owner of Backline Nurse Consulting, bringing COVID safety consulting to the music and film industries. I have one of the only systems approved and available for rapid RT-PCR COVID tests. That's right, a test with the same accuracy as you'd get at the hospital or public health center, done in 2 hours, and it comes to you. Tours and film productions are resuming, and you need COVID safety oversight if you don't want to get sued to death. Most of the COVID safety officers jumping on this bandwagon have about a 2-hour certification from the CDC or elsewhere. I have 2 bachelor's degrees in biology and nursing, as well as a nursing license, and I'm halfway to a master's in epidemiology. Head over to my website, backlinenurse.com, for more details if you need help with your event, tour, show, or production. All right, back to the show.
Like somebody drinks too much, snorts cocaine, that's the house on the ponies.
It would have been, what, 1992 when you got sober?
Correct.
Okay, so you lived in Seattle at this time, is that right?
I do, and I did.
You do and you did. What was it like back then getting sober in that community where you were?
Well, yeah, you could say, I mean, I worked at Sub Pop. I played in one of the original Sub Pop grunge bands called Catbutt. So, yes, I was atypical Seattle junkie. I mean, once I got fired from Sub Pop because I was a junkie, then I started working at an adult bookstore slash, what do they call it? You know, it's a place where in the back you can go watch naked ladies dance around. You stand in
I don't know. I've had the internet my whole life.
there, the window goes up and you can watch a naked lady dance. I mean, in my first book, the novel, then that's basically what it's about working at that place.
I was going to ask you about that. So it's a novel, but is it somewhat autobiographical?
Yes, pretty much. Unless you're a cop. No, it's not.
Then it's not. So can I ask as little or as much as you want to share?
I'll talk about myself all day long, but I won't snitch on anyone else.
Good. I wouldn't expect you to, and I wouldn't allow it. What led you to the decision to get sober?
Really, I mean, I just ran out of options. You know, like I would have continued to do drugs, and I think most junkies are this way. I would continue to do drugs for as long as I can get away with it. But I had reached the point where all my resources were gone. Eventually got fired from the porn store job as well. And I worked the graveyard shift, so that was a job that nobody wanted. I worked from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning in a porn shop. Still got fired.
Oh man, that's rough.
So I had turned to petty crime, and I was essentially homeless. You know, I was couch surfing. My resources were dwindling. I had a couple of angry drug dealers after me. And the band that I was playing in at the time, this band called the Best Kissers in the World.
Great band name.
The leader of that band, Gerald, just didn't know what to do with me. And so he called my dad.
Really?
And it was a weird thing. Like, they lived in Arizona. I lived up here. They didn't know what I was up to. I never got caught doing anything. I never got arrested. I was pretty good at it.
Right. Because you're a savvy guy.
Yeah, I was savvy. You know, you develop skills that let you charm and whatever you have to do in order to get drugs. But my time was up. And when my dad found out, it was like being a cockroach in the sink and the lights come on at night. You know, I was just busted.
Oh, man. Did he have any idea that you had struggled with that?
No, he had no idea at all. He was a career Marine before he started a computer leasing company. And my dad had never even smoked pot in his life, so he didn't know anything about drugs. He just all of a sudden got a phone call, and his son was a heroin addict, and he didn't know what to do either. So,
do you remember when was the last time you had talked with your dad or seen your dad before that?
Before that call, you know, it might have been Catbutt and L7 did a tour together in 1988 or 89. And when we played in Phoenix, we all stayed out at my dad's place. He had this little ranch in Levine, Arizona. And that may have been the last time I saw him. So he called a treatment center in Arizona and arranged for me to go there. And the call went something like, hey, your friend Gerald called, tells me that you're on heroin. And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, I don't know anything about it, but that stuff must be powerful and it must be very, very good. But I tell you what, you can fly here tonight or you can fly here tomorrow morning.
So those were your two options?
Yeah. And I said, I'll come tomorrow morning. And it was just, I was busted. I didn't have to get on that plane, but I kind of just knew that it was over for me.
Right.
And I didn't know anything about treatment. When I got on the plane, I thought they were going to shave my head and I was going to be running obstacle courses.
Like a boot camp?
I had no earthly idea what was about to happen to me. But I knew that every idea that I had had so far in my life had added up to that.
Right.
Ready to listen to someone else for a change.
Right. And so, I mean, like, what was your relationship with your dad before that? It seems like him finding out was very significant to you. What was your dynamic like prior to that?
We really weren't close until that happened. We had one thing in common is we both liked Willie Nelson, and that was kind of all we had in common. And when I came down there was a period of time like after dinner at the treatment center where people could show up and you could sit out on the picnic benches and smoke cigarettes. And my dad came every night. And towards the end of my, my 28 days at this treatment center, like, I knew it cost a lot of money, and I knew I didn't have insurance. So he paid a lot of money for that. And he says, I'll tell you what, all I want you to do is come out and spend a week with me at my ranch after you get out of here, which I was glad to do. And really, during that week was the first time that we had ever talked, man to man or as some sort of equals.
Right.
And it was fantastic. I always liked him. I just didn't really know him that well.
Right. It's really touching to me that he was so actively involved in getting you help and getting you treatment the second that he heard that you were dealing with that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because, he's a great guy. Maybe people have that relationship with their parents. Like, I liked him. I just didn't know him that well. We weren't close. He wasn't a huge influence on my life until after we finally got a chance to sit down and talk. I learned about him, he learned about me, and we became close after that.
Did you remain close after that?
I did. We remained close. He passed away. He died of cancer, and it's been 20 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
When I was managing the Super Suckers, one of the things I put together was a tribute record to Willie Nelson that was a benefit for Farm Aid. And as a result, I got to, go to Farm Aid and meet him. And then he ended up doing a song with the Super Suckers on this record. And then they ended up playing that song together on The Tonight Show.
Wow.
With Jay Leno. So my dad came out and saw the taping of The Tonight Show with Willie Nelson. And the next night, the Suckers were playing a show at the Roxy, and Willie came and sat in with them.
Wow.
Which was a top secret thing, except for Willie Nelson's bus was parked right in front of the Roxy. So word got out. After the show, we went on the bus, and my dad got to meet Willie, which was fantastic.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. That's so special. Like, that's amazing. Sorry.
It was great. And at this point, my dad had already had cancer. Like, he knew that he had cancer. And, we're sitting on the bus at the table, and Willie's, what does he do? He's rolling joints and smoking joints and talking. And so my dad smoked pot with Willie Nelson, and it was the first time he ever smoked pot in his life. I was already sober, so I didn't. But my dad was funny because he's just like, yeah, they said that marijuana would help with my nausea and everything. So yeah, I'll give it a try.
Oh my God.
But yeah, he smoked a joint with Willie Nelson, and
Did it make you feel proud getting to introduce your dad to Willie Nelson?
The best thing in the world. My whole life, one of the few things that we had in common was our love of Willie Nelson. So for me to be able to do that was so special.
That's incredible.
And then we did a lot of things with Willie after that. We played one of the 4th of July picnics while we were there. One of the security guys came up to me and they said, there's a guy at the back gate says he's your dad. And I said, well, let him in then. And my dad just drove from Snowflake, Arizona down to Lukenbach unannounced because he heard where the picnic was and he just showed up.
That's amazing. So you went through treatment that one time, that 28-day treatment, and have you been sober since then?
Yeah.
Wow. That's really impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to get sober before I went to treatment. I used to go to meetings just to get out of trouble.
Right.
So my girlfriend would be mad at me, or I would go to meetings so the guys in the band wouldn't be mad at me. But the whole time I was there, I was just thinking, like, as soon as I'm done, I'm going to page my dealer.
Right.
Being institutionalized is a great way to really drive home the idea that you have a disease.
Right. And that's the thing, like, addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. And so many folks just haven't caught up to seeing it that way, even still in 2021.
It's true. I mean, it's much more accepted now, but this was 29 years ago, and hardly anyone ever thought of that was real. Like you said, it's just a weakness or a moral failing, whatever it was. I had it. I knew that. To figure out this, the magic combination to getting sober, I don't know what exactly it was for me, but I knew when I was looking out the window of the plane as I was flying down to Arizona, and I just knew that I was done. That was kind of my first experience with surrender, right? So surrender is an important part of the program.
Would you mind explaining that for folks that aren't familiar with those programs?
Well, when you're in the throes of addiction, and it seems like a battle, right? Like you're battling everything. You're trying to put together money to buy drugs. There comes a point, I reached this point where I don't really even get high anymore. I just get not sick. And so hate yourself for being this way. You don't really want to do drugs anymore, but you have to. And it's just like this internal war that's going on. There comes a point where you just have to surrender and just say, I'm done. There's nothing I can do anymore. When you surrender, you're giving up yourself to listen to other people for a change. The people at meetings, the people in treatment, you have to trust that they're there to help you, and you sort of have to get out of ego. I didn't really have to get out of ego. To me, it was obvious I had been beat down so far. Like, I had no ego left.
Right.
I just had to stop fighting it, stop thinking that my ideas are right, stop rationalizing what I do.
Kind of accept that you don't have all the answers, and what you've done so far has not worked out so great, and so it's time to listen to other people for a minute.
And accept what you are. Like every other new person in sobriety, like they say God a lot around here. And so I had to just put that aside. Like, okay, there's a lot of people in the world who believe in God, and I can't spend all day long telling them that they're wrong. Because if I'm right, then why am I sitting next to them in this place? So I'm going to listen to somebody else. And instead of wallowing in shame, is like, okay, I'm not like everybody else. I've never felt like I was like everybody else, but I'm this monster, and I'm just going to have to accept that's what I am. And the one thing I can't do is feed this monster any more drugs and alcohol, because nothing good is going to come of that.
Right.
And I had a revelation where all of a sudden I was proud of that. All of a sudden it's like, yeah, I'm not like you. I don't have to be.
Right. I feel like people who have never experienced addiction or seen it firsthand or loved someone who has dealt with it, it's hard to comprehend just how hard it is to overcome it, because really your brain is working against you every step of the way to getting sober, because not only are you physically dependent now on whatever it is that you're using that it's going to cause you to get physically sick, but also your brain is being run by dopamine, which is one of the neurotransmitters that is most closely tied to memory. And you have all of these social memories and learned behaviors that are now tied to that dopamine, which is tied to drug and alcohol use. So it really is completely rewiring your brain, which is so incredibly difficult to imagine. And folks that talk about addiction as a moral failing, they'll never have to try as hard at anything as folks that are sober have had to overcome to get sober.
And that's why only another addict can help an addict, because there's no amount of schooling and there's no amount of reading that you can do where you can comprehend the debilitating shame that comes with, shooting up drugs when you don't really want to, but you have to.
Right. Mm-hmm. My most recent grown-up job was working at a opioid addiction treatment methadone clinic, and so many conversations, so many interactions that I've had with folks in that setting. On the surface, it seems like they're being needlessly rude or just trying to be really controlling of the interactions that we have. And that's annoying at first until you sit back and realize, what else do they really have control of in their life right now? They have to come to this clinic and see me every single day, because if they don't, they'll get kicked out, or they'll go into withdrawal, or they'll go back to a life of using, which has destroyed everything that they've had, in their lives. They don't have any control over anything. And so this interaction that we're having, it's not about me. It's not about them thinking that I'm incompetent or whatever it is that day. It's about somebody who is fighting for control and needs it. And I can't blame anyone for that, because I can't imagine being in that situation and feeling powerless in that way, I guess.
Powerless, exactly. And, they are resentful because they need you. You don't even know what their name is.
Right.
But they obsess about you all the time.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? 12 hours a day.
Yep. Right.
I never actually used methadone because I just couldn't see myself getting up that early and going.
It's so early. So early. I know.
Decided to, rob liquor stores and steal people's records instead.
That is it's so shocking to me, because the Danny Bland that I know since, God, I don't even know when we started talking, 2017 or something. And is the Danny Bland that I know is very, very together, clear-minded, kind, and generous. And that just speaks to the nature of addiction. I mean, it turns you into whatever you need to be at that time to continue to get your needs met. That's the beast of addiction, is doing what you got to do to survive.
Luckily, you weren't even born yet, so you didn't have to meet 1990 Danny Bland.
So in the music circles that you were part of back then at that time, were you seeing any other folks get treatment for addiction? Was it prevalent? What was it like back then?
I didn't really, like I said, when I went to treatment center, I didn't know what I was getting into at all. And I only knew one sober person. It's funny because I think about this now, and I've talked about it with her since, but Susie Gardner, the guitar player in L7, we were on tour with L7 Kappa tour 1988. We went around the States, and it was the most out of control tour I've ever heard of.
How so?
5 of us had to be junkies, fully active junkies at the time. Like, I have a memory of something insane happening in every place. With that in mind, Susie Gardner was sober the whole time. And she talked about that, but didn't make a big fuss about it. And the concept was so alien to me, I just sort of set her aside because I couldn't relate to it at all. When I went to treatment center, she was the only person like that I knew. And I knew people from meetings who had been sober, but I didn't know what was going to happen to me.
Right.
I had no clue. Like I said, I thought I was going to be running obstacle courses,
Right.
maybe making license plates. I don't know what I didn't know.
Do you think you were going to prison?
Basically, I thought I was going to boot camp and prison. And in fact, it was just community college for junkies.
Right. After treatment, after the week with your dad, did you go right back to Seattle?
No, this is where things got kind of interesting.
Oh, now they're going to get interesting? They haven't been up until this point?
It hasn't got interesting yet. So say 2 weeks into the treatment, I get a phone call. And my buddy Blag from the Dwarves found me.
Whoa.
And he said, hey, we just lost our bass player. When you get out of treatment, how about you come and join the Dwarves?
As a bass player.
Yeah. For me, personally, at that time, it's like the Rolling Stones calling you and say, hey, would you like to be in our band? Because I loved that band. You know, I'd been kicked out of my last band before I got sent to the treatment center. I was, feeling as low as I could possibly feel. Mostly what I was thinking is like, what am I going to do? When I went down there, I figured I can't play music anymore. I can't be in the music industry. I mean, how am I going to do that and not do drugs? And my counselor, who was an interesting cat, he knew I was into 2 things. I was into music and I was into reading and writing. And his name was Tom Boscarelli. One time we were having a session, he goes, have you ever heard of Jim Carroll? Which is a silly question because, a junkie writer. Of course, I've heard of Jim Carroll. And he's like, Tom from the Basketball Diaries. And so in the Basketball Diaries, he has a little gang that he runs around with and robs houses and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, sure. He goes, that's me. So my drug counselor in 1992 used to rob houses with Jim Carroll. It was, too interesting for me to not stick around. And we got to talking about music. He assured me that I could still play music and not do drugs. And, we brought up all kinds of examples of people who did it. And
what were some of the examples that he brought up?
Mike Ness, the band that I was playing in, we opened up for Social Distortion on a whole tour. So I did know that he was sober. I just, again, like I could not relate to it. So I set it aside as something that wasn't real. When I got the call from Blag, I asked if I could have my instruments and maybe a tape player sent to the treatment center so I could learn these songs. And they agreed to it, which is insane because they wouldn't ever let anybody else do that. I don't know why.
Maybe it's because they knew you had something special.
It was wild. I'm still shocked by that.
That's really cool.
90 days later, I was on a bus in Europe with the Reverend Horton Heat, the Super Suckers, and the Dwarves all on the same bus.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was wild.
When I've eliminated vices from my life in the past, I've noticed that usually for at least a short time, that kind of fixation gets transferred to something else. For me, transferred at least for a little while to something else. Did you notice any of that after treatment?
It's funny, like they say that you shouldn't have a geographical change early in sobriety. But, I was living in San Francisco. We were right on the edge of the hate district in the Tenderloin. And really, my job was to go to meetings and rehearse and play backgammon and smoke cigarettes with Blag in the kitchen in between. That's all I had to do. But I had a lot to learn. Like I had a whole bunch of songs to learn in a very short period of time. I just found myself being an alien everywhere I went. A new city, it's a new band, everything's weird. I'm going to black churches, to AA meetings. They're talking about Jesus as if Jesus is sitting next to them right when we're talking. Right. I just dived into it. Like I was God's special ed kid. Tell me, just let's do it. Let's talk about, like, that I don't believe this, but I'm jealous of your passion about it, to see the soul of these folks that normally I would have just laughed at. And I became a part of instead of separate.
Right. Do you feel like that was part of like kind of detaching yourself from ego?
Absolutely. And I had the choices of going to like anarchist meetings. I could have gone to atheist meetings, stacked with all sorts of hipsters. I would have felt right at home. But I chose to go to churches because I just wanted a new experience.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, I've been all those other things my whole life.
Let's listen to some different people. That's awesome. That's really, really cool. In the last episode that I did, I interviewed guitarist Jordan Merrigan, who survived the Las Vegas shooting. And he was talking about how even when they didn't have time to keep up with group therapy or counseling, they really did have kind of like a traveling support group because it was something that they've all experienced together and they're all coping with and processing together. And so I was going to ask if you have found that to be the case with sobriety.
At the root of it, it's all the same thing. We're dealing with the trauma that we experienced. I travel around a lot with Dave Alvin is really my main gig, or has been for the longest period of time. And there's sober people in that. When I was traveling with the MC5, a lot of sobriety in that bus as well. And now, Steve Earle is the ultra sober tour. There's no booze allowed in backstage, and there's no booze allowed in the bus, and that's all fine by me.
When I tried to love, it was just a song, something I could not say.
I'm just going to pause for a moment here to talk about Justin. Steve Earle, who Danny works for as a tour manager, is the father of Nashville musician Justin Townes Earle, and both are renowned in Americana music. Justin and Steve both battled addiction. Steve found sobriety in 1994, while unfortunately, Justin passed away on August 20th of 2020 of an accidental overdose in his home here in Nashville. Justin is survived by his wife Jennifer and his daughter Etta St. James Earle. Danny went out to New York after Justin's passing to help Steve as he worked on JT, a tribute album to his son, comprised of 10 of Justin's songs as well as an original written by Steve. The album was released on January 4th, 2021, and proceeds go to a trust for Justin's daughter, Etta. Something that I cannot reiterate enough when talking about the topic of addiction is that it is a disease and not a moral failing. It has a strong genetic component, not unlike other chronic diseases such as heart disease or cancer. It is impossible to understand what it feels like to have the vice grip of addiction holding on to every aspect of your life unless you've experienced it. But it's vital for those of us who don't personally struggle with it to understand that it is not a flaw in character or integrity to experience this disease. If we are going to help loved ones, we need to understand it better. All right, back to the show.
Heavy in my heart, honey in my head. When I took the heart away.
Without question, it's the worst thing that can happen to a person, right? Having to bury your own child, I can't imagine. It's just universally accepted as the worst thing that can happen. And, with Steve, he not only was his kid, but it was kind of like his protege and his legacy and his sadness must just be so complicated. It's not only that, but, Justin died at pretty much the same age as when Steve got sober.
Wow.
They came to a fork in the road and went two different directions. It didn't have to happen.
Right. Do you feel like there's still a need within the music industry for support for mental health as well as addiction? Do you still see room for improvement and moving forward in that area?
There can always be improvement. With sobriety, we have resources, right? There has been a program in place long before we got here that works. When I first started touring sober, I would have to go to the yellow pages and look up to where there were meetings at. And that made things really difficult. Now you can just look on your phone an hour before you get to town. You can call someone to come pick you up. There's many resources like that. But in the last 20 years, the stigma of addiction and alcoholism has sort of, there's less shame attached to it. I don't feel like it's the same with depression and other mental health issues. And there is a place where we need more resources. I can tell a drunk what he needs to hear, and I can point him in the direction he needs to go. We can go get a meeting. We can go get some coffee. We can talk. I can help. But with depression, we need more professionals involved in the music industry. And it's weird, because the same way that there was a stigma attached to addiction and alcoholism, the one that's attached to depression and suicide and mental health issues is terrifying to a civilian, right? Everybody feels so helpless around it. And it's the same with the drug addicts, but we know what to do for them. But other mental health issues are just, I'm not an expert, but they seem so much more complicated.
Right.
So much more internalized, and there's still the stigma and the shame attached to having mental health issues that's not there with addiction anymore.
Right. I feel like with addiction, it's much more defined and less nebulous, the plan of action. It's clear what the issue is, but often too, addiction is a symptom of a problem. And, the first step to addressing that larger problem is getting rid of this very destructive symptom of it. But you're right. I feel like with depression, anxiety, mental illness in general, not everyone knows how to deal with that because not everyone should have to. It really does require experts a lot of the time. And it's clear that mental illness and depression and suicide is such a kind of very endemic to the music industry, and many, many reasons why, I'm sure. But especially in an industry of gig workers, having health insurance and like case management services in place is so much more difficult. It makes it a lot harder to navigate a system that is already extremely hard to navigate.
If we had universal health care that had a mental health element to it, then that would be a great help. I'm lucky. I've never had a suicidal thought in my life. As a collective, as a society, the next thing that we need to do is to make it okay, is to make those feelings all right, because we've lost far too many people to it. And, musicians and artists and artists of all kinds, it's just part of the job sometimes, or it's an occupational hazard.
Yeah.
Attached to great art. It just always has been. I don't know why.
Yeah. I think just feeling things strongly in general lends itself to great art and destructive behavior and, self-destructive thoughts a lot of the time.
Like I said, as a collective, as a community, and until we can talk about it openly and without shame, we're going to lose our Chris Cornells and our Amy Ferrises, and the list goes on and on and on.
Absolutely. When I lived in Minnesota, I was a psychiatric case manager, targeted case management nurse for a social work organization working with folks specifically who suffer with severe and persistent mental illness. So like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things like that. And so basically as a case manager, it was my job to navigate the systems that exist to help them so that they don't have to do that on their own. Like, Medicare, Medicaid, mental health, inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, all of the different things that go into mental health and addiction services. And it was just mind-boggling to me how often even I would struggle trying to get something to happen the way it should happen, getting this person's med filled on time so they don't go into withdrawal. Little things like that are like, even as a nurse whose job it is to navigate that system, it was just like pulling teeth sometimes. And it's like, how do you expect people who are suffering with mental illness or addiction, how do you expect them to even begin to have to navigate this system? It's just ridiculous.
You're right. You are a nurse and you couldn't do it. Imagine someone who can't get out of bed.
Exactly.
And again, I personally have been spared that particular affliction, but I've known plenty of people, and over the years, I believe them. When they say they can't get out of bed, I know it's true, because why would they say it?
Right.
And yeah, I think that's our next big challenge.
Yeah. And I feel like especially now, I mean, okay, so tours are going to start resuming sooner than later, which is exciting for everybody. But then also, it's going to be people going back to work after over a year now of not working. And for some people, I think it's going to be really good. It's going to be, exactly what they need. For some folks, I think the transition is going to be difficult, and it totally depends on who you are. But the thing that I think is really important for everyone to remember right now is to just cut yourself some slack. Like, the past year has been so hard on everyone. Even if you don't ever struggle with mental illness or depression or anxiety, normally people are struggling with it now just because the circumstances have been so traumatic. And so everyone needs to be cutting themselves some slack right now. So, understand that going right back to real life again when things resume, it might be difficult, and that's normal. And it's just going to take a little bit of time because we've been on pause for a long time now.
Yeah. Like I said, me being a person who never really experienced depression in his life, there was a time over the summer where I realized, like, you know what? I've been sitting here all day long staring at this wall. I better talk to my doctor about that. Or the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg hit me hard. I mean, it hit the country collectively very hard. But at the time, I was just like, I mean, I should be sad. It is a shame. But the dread that brought on for me was over the top.
And a lot of the time, something like that, when you realize that you're having kind of a disproportionate grief reaction, a lot of the time it can mean that things that you have been upset about inside, but you haven't vocalized or haven't dealt with or processed, you're attaching all of those feelings onto this thing because, okay, this is an appropriate thing to be upset about instead of just being upset in my house alone. This person died, and so I can attach all these feelings that I've been having onto this event. And then you recognize, like, it feels like I might not be reacting to this proportionately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today, April, whatever the hell day it is, 2021, look back to April 2020. And how do you feel mentally, emotionally today compared to April 2020?
Well, I feel good. One of the things that happened to me in quarantine, like I lived by myself. You have to remember, for like 5 or 6 years before the lockdown, I would be traveling like between 250 and 300 days a year. So at first I was just like, it was weird to have my land legs on, right? Like a little sigh of relief. And also in May of last year, I got a call from an old friend of mine who said, I have a drinking problem. And he's a musician who tours all the time as well. And I think him being at home with the wife and the kids, he realized all of a sudden that his drinking was not normal. When he was on tour all the time, that's what was expected. But he realized he had a problem. He reached out to me for help. And normally I travel so much that what I do is I get somebody into a treatment center, or I hook them up with a sponsor, and I check in with them every once in a while, see how it's going. In this particular case, I knew I was here for a while. So I just said, all right, my friend, this is not how it's normally done. But what you're going to do is go online, order yourself a book, and call me tomorrow at 1:00. And you're going to call me at 1:00 in the afternoon every day until I tell you to stop. And we got to work. We started doing step work. And it was incredible, for probably more for me than for him, although he's sober to this day. And we're coming up on a year.
Wow.
And I got to go through the book again and read it again. And the timing was perfect. I don't know where my head would be at if that didn't happen. But I'm in a good place now because of that.
So do you feel like revisiting that step work and going through that again with him and, kind of revisiting all of that, and then also having to be there for somebody else, do you feel like that really helped improve the trajectory as far as pandemic outcomes go?
I mean, it's doing service work, is being of service to someone. It's not really very rock and roll of me to say, but that is really what brings me actual happiness.
Me too.
I can buy all the records I can order online that I want and unwrap them as they come every single day. It's like Christmas. But the truth is just like being of service, being there for someone who needs you is really what makes you happy.
Yeah, that's absolutely how I have always felt, especially working in mental health, because I struggle with depression and anxiety too. And I would get there and whatever bullshit I was fixated on that day would just be put on the back burner because here are some kids that really need me. Here are some kids having the worst days of their literal lives right now. And what I'm going through is so insignificant compared to that. And somebody needs me to be the stable one and to be the one that's helping at that moment. And so it really gets yourself out of your own way, I think.
It does. And plus, they can tell that because you have experience with it, same reason, the same way only another addict can help an addict. Someone who has experience with depression, the kid will see the authenticity in your desire to be of help, and they have to gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
They can tell that you're the real deal.
A misconception I think a lot of people have about patients in psychiatric environments in general, but especially like teenagers like I was working with, they think that they don't notice things. But the thing is, these are some of the most perceptive people I've ever met in my life. They can spot phoniness a mile away and it is done. They do not want to hear from you if they can tell that you're being fake or disingenuous. And I think one of the reasons that I really, really connected with my patients in that way, because that stuff drives me nuts too. And they just have no time for it. They don't want to hear it from you. And I think working in chemical dependency, I've noticed the same. Like, I'm always open with my patients in that respect, that I've never personally dealt with addiction, but always want to hear about what they go through so that I can learn what they're going through and what they've experienced personally, because it's different for everyone.
Well, and it's the cycle, right? Being a sponsor during the pandemic time helped me grow as a person. It helped me deal with my alcoholism, which is always there. It's how we pay it back. It's how we pay back when someone did it for us early. And it's the same thing with what you're doing. They can tell that you're genuine and that you're the real deal. And what you get from it is help for yourself, or else why on earth would you do it? It's got to be the worst thing in the world.
Right. I think a lot of people who work in helping professions don't want to admit that, because my work is not selfless, because it helps me, I think, a lot of the time more than it helps the people that I'm helping. That's just how it is. And I love to help. I love to see their successes, but it also makes me feel good to see them succeed. And so it's not selfless by any means.
It's an absolutely selfish endeavor, and that's why we do it.
Absolutely. Are you allowed to talk about touring with Steve Earle this summer?
I think so.
Sweet. So you are going on tour with Steve Earle this summer. And is that going to be your first tour back?
Our actual tour starts the 1st of July in Texas. So we're going to play at Green Hall first, which I've never been to, but I understand it's like a sort of a classic Texas dance hall type place. And then we're going up to Billy Bob's, which I've also never been to, but same thing there. And then this sort of just got confirmed, is we'll be the support act on the 4th of July in Natchez, Mississippi for Hank Williams Jr.
Shut up. I've already decided that I'm coming to that.
That's going to be out of control, right? It's like, I guess it's an amphitheater, and there's going to be zero social distancing. There's not going to be a map anywhere. I mean, a mask anywhere.
This is why you need a nurse to come with you for this.
That's the kind of the solution to everything. What we need to do, it's up to the scientists to really perfect this cloning thing that they've been talking about for years. Because we need a clone of Nurse Jade to be sitting in the back bench of every van, every bus, every plane that goes on tour. Just make like 150 of you.
That would be my nightmare, but
but it would be very good for the rest of us. Yeah, it's going to be wild. We're all vaccinated. If we had our way, everyone would have to show they're vaccinated before they bought a ticket. But I have, part of the writer's request that anybody who's actually going to have interaction with the band or crew, they have to have their card to show they're vaccinated.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you're going to be immediately interacting with the band, need to have that vaccination. And
100%.
Steve doesn't want to be, doesn't want an event that people go to see him play turn out to be the origin of a super spreader event.
Exactly.
We're going to be as careful as we can. And a lot of the gigs are outdoors. A lot aren't. We need hazmat suits, don't we?
But they have to look cool. I'll work on that. That'll be my next job. Cool hazmat suits. They have to be outlaw country looking. I'll figure it out.
Like Fringe. hanging.
Yes. Anything else you'd like to say before we sign off on this wonderful interview?
I have a story coming out in a a literary magazine called Glue Gun this summer. The new story, which is actually just part of the next novel that I'm writing. Other than that, I'll just see you out there on the road.
And you are Mr. Danny Bland, Mr. Danny Bland on Instagram and Twitter, right?
Yes, I think so.
I think you are. You guys will really enjoy his Instagram. He has really fun themes like Finger Friday and which is where you post somebody flipping someone off in a really fun and unique way.
Your Mom Monday.
Your Mom Monday, that's right. Women Crush Wednesday.
When I first looked at Instagram, I was just like, oh, this isn't really made for grown-up men to seem like this is kind of for teenage girls. And then I noticed Man Crush Monday and Woman Crush Wednesday, and like, all right, I could do that. And I have to make up a few. So we got Sacrilege Sunday, and I don't really have anything for Saturdays yet. We'll see.
All right.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking with me and being so open about all the things that we chatted about. You continue to be one of my favorite people, and you continue to surprise me with how cool you are every time we talk.
Well, I was listening to the first episode and I was so impressed. I think I even wrote you a text like, this sounds so professional, and the show was so good, and so just the way it flowed. And like I said, I listened to that first episode and I'm like, the poor motherfucker who has to follow that guy's story. And then turns out it's me. Oh, well.
It's you, and it's because you're too nice. I would like to remind everyone to buy every book Danny has ever written. His novel, In Case We Die, was released in 2013 and is a semi-autobiographical glimpse into the Seattle grunge scene of the early 90s through the lens of addiction. The very first review of this book that I saw says it better than I ever could. Quote, devastating, beautiful, and all-consuming. Not since Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane has a book moved me to such a fetal, teary-eyed mess. This book blew my mind, unquote. Danny's first haiku book came out in 2014, and it's called I Apologize in Advance for the Awful Things I'm Gonna Do. His second haiku book was released in 2019, and it is incredible. What this man can do in the span of 17 syllables is diabolical and gorgeous. Both of his haiku books feature photography from Danny's friends, including and especially Greg Dooley of the Afghan Wigs. That is all for my show today. I cannot wait to bring you the next episode. I am so excited about it. Please find me at Backstage Triage on Instagram and Twitter, or support the podcast via Patreon or Podbean, where you'll get bonus episodes in exchange for your patronage. Also, if you want a shout out in next week's episode, leave me a review or send me some feedback so I can keep getting better at this. Speaking of which, I said last week I'd give a shout out to anyone who had the most constructive feedback for me, since I'm still brand new at this and I want to keep improving. This shout out is going out to Nira, who sent me a wonderful message on Twitter. Thank you so much, Nira. You made my week, and I can tell from your Twitter page that you've been a fan of Jordan's music since the days of Paradise Fears, and that made me so happy. Again, my name is Jade Van Clay, and this is Backstage Triage, and I am going to leave you with my current favorite Danny Bland haiku from his book, We Shouldn't Be Doing This. Art is created when sad girls stand in corners plotting their revenge. See you next week.